Hi, Facebook friends. Michelle Edmonds here with Idaho News 6. It is time for another edition of Making the Grade. And of course, there is a whole lot to get to as schools have started to reopen for the fall, whether that be virtually or trying to do partially, maybe some in session. But joining me to talk about all of these things is Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Kevin, nice being off for a week last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, I feel like I missed a lot of news last week, but there's plenty going on this week. I feel like
We'll get
we're
you caught up.
non-stop there on Monday.
So let's start with the fall reopening plan, because fact of the matter is that the state's second largest school district went back to school yesterday. We're talking about the Boise School District starting remote virtual learning, and everybody else is still kind of in the midst of trying to figure out their plans. We would love to hear from all of you in the comments section about what you've decided to do with your kids. If you're a teacher, what you're facing as a teacher. We'll bring in some of those comments. But give me an overview, kind of a flyover here, Kevin, of what's happening this week with Idaho schools.
Well, as you mentioned, the Boise School District started on Monday. It's going to be all virtual for all 25,000 students, at least until after Labor Day. The district is going to revisit this issue and revisit what to do with in-person learning on September 8th. So what you saw across the district was everybody was at home. Parents and kids working through that first day of school. And I think that's kind of the first week is going to be slow. Kobe Dennis, the superintendent, was saying last week that the first week is going to be orientation. It's going to be making sure that students can get the learning materials that they need online, that they can look at the videos they need to look at, that they can turn in assignments. So it's going to start slowly this week for students, whether they're in this virtual setting short term or whether they're going to be in this virtual setting for the entire semester.
We were taking a look at this morning at idahoednews.org, which you can see all of these stories that we're talking about there. We're flashing them up on the screen. But one of the things that you and I have talked about as the summer has progressed, Kevin, is will there be a teacher shortage? Are teachers making different decisions? And there is some worry about that people might say, no, thanks, not going back in the classroom if that's what they're being asked to do.
Right. And when the State Board of Education met on Monday and heard from K-12 leaders across the state, that is a concern that's starting to come up. Teachers concerned about going into a classroom, being in a classroom, especially, veteran teachers, older teachers, teachers who may be in an at-risk population, who may have an increased risk of contracting COVID-19. Those teachers are looking at this situation and saying, in many cases, it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel comfortable to be there. And we heard that in the town hall we did a couple of weeks ago when we heard from teachers who were facing that decision. It's tough. And now administrators are having to deal with the fallout of that. And it's not just a fallout in terms of the full-blown classroom teachers. It's also substitute teachers could be in short supply in many communities. So you have kind of a double whammy, because if we have a shortage of substitute teachers, it's tough to backfill classes if teachers do get sick. And if you want teachers to not come to school if they're feeling sick, especially in the middle of a pandemic, well, how do you cover classes if you can't bring a substitute in? So this is going to be a difficult situation. It's going to be difficult whether these schools return to in-person learning or adopt in-person learning, or if they have to stick with the virtual model. You still got to staff these classrooms. It's going to be a challenge.
Well, and that could be a reason to go virtual, correct? I mean, if you've got enough shortages of teachers who aren't coming back or don't want to be back or can't be back because they're sick, then possibly you have to go virtual at some point because of that, correct?
It might help you a little bit, but to some degree, you're still going to have teachers working with students, whether it's in a virtual environment or a face-to-face environment. And, Boise, when they're talking about what they're hoping to do with the online school, they're hoping that there's going to be, FaceTime between teachers and students every day, that they want it to be more of an interactive process maybe than what we saw in the spring. That takes staffing.
All right, I want to bring in a comment here from Shannon. She's saying they're in the Boise School District, started yesterday. opted for online learning for the entire semester. Unfortunately, we were told by the district class sizes that would remain from 25 to 30 students, just like the brick and mortar school. Both of my sons had classes yesterday. Not one of them had less than 50 students in it. She's saying the ratio is completely unacceptable for the learning environment for both the teacher and the student. I have taught online for over 5 years and never would, and it kind of peters off there, but I would assume recommend.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, the districts, they're just trying to get their feet underneath them. And there has been some idea that schools are pushing, like the West Ada School District, for a later start date now after Labor Day to try and get some of these issues resolved, whether or not schools are virtual or partially virtual. And that certainly goes to what's happening maybe in the Boise School District.
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think what we see happen in these next couple of weeks in West Ada is going to be really interesting on a lot of levels, because as you mentioned, I think West Ada is trying to figure out how they're going to staff. They're also having to figure out how they're going to get devices in the hands of students. That's still a big challenge. As the district has talked about already, they've got computers, devices, cases that have been on order. You got to get those ready to get in the hands of students if you do go to an online learning setup. West Ada and I think districts that have delayed are hoping that something changes in terms of the coronavirus case numbers, that the numbers and the outbreak might be more conducive to some sort of a blended learning environment where maybe students are at least going to school part-time. A lot to sort out here in a very short amount of time.
Well, and the Idaho School Board Association gave out its guidance to school boards, trustees. So tell people, if they don't understand, what the Idaho School Board Association does and is, Kevin, first of all, and then kind of what they recommended, or at least the guidance they put out.
Right. So the School Boards Association lobbies on behalf of school boards and school trustees from across the state, and provides also professional guidance to elected trustees across the state. And what the School Board Association said last week is, listen to your health districts. Comply with what the health district is saying schools should do as far as reopening or staying closed or doing a blended learning environment. And this comes as we're seeing some school districts maybe looking to go their own way, maybe looking at doing some sort of open campus or blended environment that runs counter to what the health districts are recommending. We saw that with West Ada a couple of weeks ago, where the school board, the school trustees voted to leave open the option of blended learning, even if you have substantial coronavirus spread within the district, the kind of substantial spread that would lead the health district to recommend keeping schools closed and going exclusively to online learning. You had the West Ada trustees say, well, wait a minute, we'd like to kind of leave the option open for blended learning. Now they kind of walked that back later in the week to say that what they're thinking more in terms of is opening schools to small group learning. So, regardless, you are starting to see school boards and school trustees say, we'd like to figure out a way to open, even if the health districts are recommending a more conservative approach. So, what the School Board Association is saying is basically, the best way to protect yourself as a district and to head off a possible lawsuit is to listen to what the health districts are recommending.
I was going to say, lean into that, Kevin, because this has to do with liability as well. Correct?
The civil liability issue, which is a big concern for school administrators, and it's something that we may see the legislature take up in the next few days. That's already being discussed as the legislature positions towards a possible special session, which could occur as early as next week.
Well, let's move there, because Governor Brad Little has called for a special session, which is a very rare thing. And he is supposed to be putting out a proclamation that will let us know exactly what is to be held in that special session. And only what the governor sets on the agenda can be discussed.
Mhm.
But one of those things, as you're mentioning here, is this idea of a civil liability waiver or liability for the schools over the coronavirus issue. What do you expect to see on the proclamation that will be discussed?
Well, and we're kind of in a holding pattern because, as you summarized it absolutely correctly, all of the decisions rest with the governor right now. It's up to the governor to decide if there's going to be a special session in the first place. Only the governor can call a special session, and the governor gets to set the parameters for that special session. The governor gets to say, I want this topic discussed, this topic discussed. And if it isn't on that list, lawmakers aren't supposed to take it up. So we're kind of waiting to see what the governor comes out with in terms of a proclamation that sets a date for the session and sets the parameters, sets the agenda for the special session. I would expect that you're going to see civil liability come up in a special session. There's a lot of discussion about that topic, and legislators have already drafted a bill, have amended a bill to address the civil liabilities. That does not make it a slam dunk, however. It's been very interesting to note that the Idaho Education Association has pushed back against the civil liability bill. The Idaho Freedom Foundation, conservative/libertarian group, has also pushed back against a civil liability bill. And, this is what we who follow politics would call an unholy alliance. It is not very common to see the IEA and the Idaho Freedom Foundation on the same side of a debate, but you're seeing
So
it right.
why are they? What's
their basic concern is that this legislation might go too far in terms of providing almost too much protection and to school districts, and tipping the balance away from from the individuals and the individual's right to pursue a lawsuit in the event of a coronavirus case, and almost shields the school districts too much. So I think you're seeing a lot of fine tuning of the legislation. You've seen several amendments last week. We don't know what the bill is exactly going to look like, but when you're seeing this kind of pushback from both ends of the spectrum, that's going to make it may make it difficult to get something passed. And Governor Little has made clear that he wants to convene a special session, but he wants to get something passed. He does not simply want to bring legislators back and have days of debate over a civil liability bill and have nothing to show for it. So, he's going to want to count noses. And I think legislative leaders are going to have to count noses and say, well, if the bill does this, are you going to vote for it or not? And I think the longer it goes on in terms of waiting for the governor to issue a proclamation to set a date for a special session, that tells me, the longer it goes, that you've got a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes, probably to try to figure out where legislators stand. And is there, are there 36 votes in the House? Are there 18 votes in the Senate to get something passed?
Well, and as Idaho Ed News had reported, the governor is having meetings with leadership to try and figure this out right now, because you're exactly right.
He's got a standing appointment every day this week with House Speaker Scott Bedke and Senate President Pro Tem Brent Hill, who's retiring, but this is basically going to be his final act as a state senator, because he's still in office until November or December, so he will still preside. Daily conversations between legislative leaders and the governor. And it's all kind of gearing towards the possibility of a special session.
And we should mention, Kevin, none of this is happening in a bubble. These issues are happening all over the United States as states are trying to figure out how to deal with coronavirus with their schools, with the liability issue. So it'll be fascinating to me to see which states, which perhaps major school districts, which ones tend to lead the way in what is the best practice, what works. I don't know. It's going to be, we've looked at Georgia and their reopenings already and their shutdowns already. It's fascinating to watch.
It's certainly not a unique issue to Idaho. This has come up in other states.
Let's talk a little bit about higher education. We had an incredible panel on a couple of weeks ago talking about the reopening plans for Idaho's colleges and universities. And again, so much of it being a blended model for most of them. But there was a meeting where the higher education leaders came and talked with the state board about their plans, their thoughts. And you know, it's really a mix, and everyone's trying to do their best. That's what I keep hearing. We're trying to do our best, but they're also ready to pivot.
Right. The higher education opening process is also unfolding this week. Idaho State University was the first state university to come out of the gates and open its doors on Monday. So Monday was opening day at ISU's main campus in Pocatello and its satellite campuses. Kevin Satterlee, the president of Idaho State, talked a little bit about the opening day on Monday. And one of the things I thought was interesting, you know, he talked about where he thinks enrollment is going to be. This is something we've been watching pretty closely. He's expecting enrollment to be down maybe about 4%. That's not a small number, but it's not nearly as dramatic as the initial forecasts. There have been national forecasts that have suggested that colleges and universities could lose 20 to 22% of their enrollment as students stay home. That's cataclysmic. Those kind of numbers will affect higher education finances for years and years to come. 4% decrease. You know, when I talked to Satterlee earlier in the summer and the numbers were more in the 3% range, he was saying, you know, we can manage a 3% decrease. And I suspect, I haven't talked to him since Monday, a 4% decrease is probably something that's also manageable. The numbers are a little bit all over the map from what we're hearing from the colleges and universities. You know, Boise State, President Marlene Tromp on Monday said right now the enrollment looks like it's going to be up 1%. They're actually going to see more students. And one of the reasons for that, she says, is that, you know, students in other states are looking to Idaho now. You know, they want to get into a face-to-face learning environment. It's not available in their home state. They're deciding to come to Idaho, come to Boise State. So, you know, we still don't really know what these enrollment numbers are going to look like. It doesn't look like it's going to be a meltdown in terms of enrollment, and that's a big deal. That's a really big deal for the colleges and universities. But we're also, you know, starting to get a sense of what college life is going to look like, what campus life is going to look like. And it's, you know, a lot of the protocols that we're dealing with it with everyday life. You know, masks are required across campuses. Social distancing is being enforced as best you can. A lot of smaller class sizes, you know, shifting to online classes where possible, shifting larger classes into even larger facilities so that you can space students out. One of the interesting things Kevin Satterlee said about opening day at ISU was, you know, like the other colleges and universities across the state, ISU is requiring masks. And you know, he said that they have staffers that are, as he called them, mask ambassadors. They're showing up at the, at the academic buildings, at the entrances to the academic buildings to remind students, you know, you're required to wear a mask. And oh, by the way, if you don't have a mask, here's a temporary mask that you can use to get through the day. What he said is that one of their mask ambassadors spent 3 hours outside one of the academic buildings. Thousands of students came in, only 4 were not wearing a mask. And the 4 that were flagged at the door and said, you know, and told to put a mask on, took the temporary mask, and he said there was no pushback. So he took that as a sign, well, it's anecdotal, that, you know, the word is getting out. And I think colleges and universities are really trying to work with staff and students to say, if you want to stay open, if you want to have face-to-face learning to any degree, we've got to do what we can to curb the spread of coronavirus, and masks are one step in that direction.
You kind of wonder if football being postponed got to not only the students, but to many of us as well. You know, I know it's anecdotal in that sense as well, but there are definite ramifications. I realize that monetarily when we start talking about Boise State football, but also it might go to the heart of how people are feeling about where this virus is for campus life.
I think you're right. I think that may have been a wake-up call to a lot of folks in the college and university communities when you see conferences making the decision to call off fall sports, not just football, but football being the biggest of the group and certainly the revenue driver of all the fall sports. When you see that decision being made, when you see that announcement come, I think that certainly resonated with people and maybe resonated in some different ways.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking with Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. This is Making the Grade, everybody. We'd love to hear your comments, questions, thoughts as we're talking about the fall reopening plans for schools. We'll come back to this topic in just a moment, but Kevin, I do want to touch on another major story that you have written about this past week, and that's the fact that the transgender athletics ban has been put on hold. So again, I'm going to have you back up here in case people have not been following this as closely as you and I have. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of this ban, of this bill, of this law, and now where it stands?
Right. So this is a very controversial piece of legislation that passed this year. And what it would do is it would prohibit transgender women and girls from participating in women's and girls' sports. It is the first of its kind nationally. There's been a lot of debate about transgender athletics and transgender athletes and their eligibility. Idaho's law is the first of its kind, and it does run counter to NCAA policy, International Olympic Committee policy. After the passage of the bill, and after Governor Little signed it into law at the end of March, a lawsuit was filed in federal court within 2.5 weeks. That's the case that is working its way through federal court right now. And what you had on Monday was the judge who's presiding over the case issuing a temporary injunction. What that says is that the law is not in effect. It's not being enforced. Kind of a moot point, because right now, as we just mentioned in the previous segment, collegiate athletics are on hold across Idaho for the fall. And to a large degree, high school athletics could be on hold for the fall or could be curtailed greatly. So the fact that the ban is on hold for the foreseeable future may not have a real concrete effect on students or on athletic rosters. It may be kind of academic. But what this means is that the judge, Judge David Nye, wants to take a closer look at the constitutional issues that have been raised about the law. And in his ruling on Monday, he kind of tipped his hand. He indicated that he felt like there's a good chance that the plaintiffs, the folks who filed the lawsuit in the first place, who are challenging the constitutionality of this law, may wind up prevailing in court. So a little bit of a tell there from the judge. We'll now have to wait and see how this case plays itself out in a federal district court. And as I said, since this is a first of its kind law, whatever happens in the federal district court in Idaho could easily wind up being appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals, the Regional Circuit Court of Appeals. It could even ultimately, down the road, this could be a case that winds up before the U.S. Supreme Court, because it is such a groundbreaking piece of legislation. But first things first, the ban is on hold for the time being. Judge Nye wants to look at the constitutional issues. We'll wait and see what happens at that court level, knowing that that may not be the final word.
Do we have any idea on the timing of that?
I don't. We're only a few months into the lawsuit, so I don't really know when a hearing will be held. There was a hearing held earlier this summer to go through some of the constitutional issues, but as far as a decision on those matters, I don't know when we'll see that.
Well, if you'd like to read up on that topic, Kevin did a great job on his write-up at idahoednews.org. I want to go right back to our fall reopening plan. If there are other questions or comments out there, here's one from Katie, Kevin, that I want to bring up. And she says, honestly, I feel like each state should leave it open to counties. Bannock County, not as hard hit as Ada, they have split classes up on alternating days, in person in class, and also for distance learning. They've given the families the option for straight distance learning. She says providing options gives each home choices to do what works best for them. And I think a lot of school districts have been doing just that, in that
is
trying to
happening.
provide options.
You know, you have some school districts that are ready to open entirely in communities where coronavirus spread has not been as extensive, or where there's been, you know, minimal spread. You know, as opposed to, you know, a place like Ada County or Canyon County, where we've seen extensive spread.
Well, as you've said all along, that your job this fall is going to be trying to keep track of who's open, who's closed, who's online, and what it all looks like.
And it could change day to day and week to week. And it will change day to day and week to week. There's no question about it.
Well, we'll be here to help you cover it all here on Making the Grade. Kevin, I have to ask you, since we always do, Kevin shows us the socks segment at the end of Making the Grade, because it's fun and we need a little fun in our lives, especially since Kevin and I can't physically be together to do Making the Grade. Did anybody give you socks for your birthday?
No, actually, no. I got really nice presents. I was very happy. Everybody put a lot of thought into gifts, but no socks.
No socks. All right. Well, are you wearing a pair you would like to show off today?
Yes. So, you know, we don't need Scott Dorval to tell us that it's hot today or it's going to be hot today. So I wanted to kind of pivot away from midsummer and heat wave and get some Christmas lights going, because we're only 4 months away from Christmas. And I know that, you know, parents who are going through this online learning environment are probably wondering when Christmas break will come.
Some people call it Christmas in July. For Kevin, it's Christmas socks in August. I love it. Oh, Kevin, thank you for all the work you guys do at Idaho Education News. It's been a summer roller coaster, and as schools continue to reopen over the next couple of weeks, it's going to be fun to sit and talk with you and everybody else who's joining us on Facebook to give us your thoughts and questions and comments. We always love to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Kevin. Enjoy your day. We appreciate you being here for Making the Grade.
Well, thanks for having me. Talk to you next week.